Hello, World Economic News people. Let's start with this headline. 6 charts which prove that central banks all over the globe are recklessly printing money. Start with a chart from the United States, source St. Louis Fed. And we can see in 1980, the M2 money supply was about $2 trillion. And now it's about $9 trillion. 2 to 9 since 1980. The Bank of England, the United Kingdom, you can see their M2 money supply went a bit shaky during the crisis, but it started that relentless ramping up continuing now. Good, must be good because they're doing it. The EU, similar size to the United States, and we can see 1980, these are translated to US dollars, so we can compare. 1980, about $1 trillion. Money supply up to $9 trillion, about the same size as the United States. So it must be the right thing to do because they're both doing it. The same amount. Bank of Japan, source the Bank of Japan. 1980, about $1 trillion to now about $9 trillion. Japan, smaller economy, so they've got a bit more money going on there. But they're very efficient, those little Japanese people, aren't they? So they probably need that little extra bit of money. 1 trillion up to 9 trillion, 1980 to now. China, a more modern society. So we can't go back to 1980. We go to the year 2000, where it was below 2 trillion US dollars in their M2 money supply. And now they're over $10 trillion. But then there are lots of little Chinese people working very hard, so they need lots of money. Finish with India, and you can see from the Reserve Bank of India's figures that they don't have much money. They started at nearly nothing, and now they've only got 350 billion US dollars. Nothing. What are they doing in India? Obviously not much. Have you understood all that? Have you sorted out why it's all happening? If you have, tell me. Bloomberg gives us Fed assets rise to record $2.51 trillion on the purchases under quantitative easing 2. The Federal Reserve's total assets rose by $8.73 billion to $2.51 trillion as the central bank bought Treasury securities as part of the second round of its quantitative easing strategy. It started this whole economic mess at about 0.8 of a trillion, and it had about 0.8 of a trillion on its balance sheet for a long time. But it's gone up $1.7 plus trillion for jolly good reasons, I'm sure. This chart is the Fed funds rate. This is the thing that the Fed announces, and the interest rate is going up, the interest rate's going down. It's the effective Fed funds rate. They have a target rate and they get as close as they can to it, which they can do because they can manipulate the short-term rates. And as you can see, it hit the deck at the end of 2008 and at the start of 2011, over 2 years later, it is still there. Effectively 0.25%. Or 0.25%. And fortunately, it shows that they're not doing anything much wrong because that red line is the CPI, the inflation prices that you pay. And they're only running at about 2% positive inflation. So that's really very good. And if you think you're paying much more, you're obviously completely wrong because the Fed know all these sorts of things because that's what they're paid to know. Here's another chart from the St. Louis Fed, which is the Consumer Price Index, but just for energy. And that's running at about 8% plus inflation rate on energy. But fortunately, we don't have to use much energy, so it really doesn't count, so it's fine. Grigor US, we move on to spare capacity theory. Now, sarcasm alarm goes off. The whole of this first paragraph, I believe, comes under the sarcasm heading. There are many things that people know about oil markets. This is especially true of those who know little about oil. They know that oil prices, for example, are controlled by ExxonMobil, or at the very least by nefarious speculators in the futures markets. They also know that global oil producers don't use much of their own oil, and, in particular, they know that OPEC has lots of spare capacity. Oil production capacity that can be turned on tomorrow, for example, should world events disrupt supply. Sarcasm. Because only idiots say that. Right. I'll crack into the next paragraph. I note with interest that David Fife of IEA Paris, they're the one that release their reports at the end of each year, and they've been bringing their estimates down and down and down as the years go by. Earlier today attempted to calm world oil markets, there's the link there, by reminding us that in the OECD, that's us, the productive Western nations, there are over 1.6 billion barrels of oil in inventory stocked. By marshalling these Western supplies of already pumped above-ground oil, the world could gain a new source of oil for up to 1 year, at the rate of 4 million barrels a day. There are a few sticky issues surrounding such a claim, not least of which is that oil markets regard drawdowns of above-ground inventories as a reason to send prices even higher. But that's beside the point. Let's consider what Fife did not claim. And he did not claim, the head of IEA's oil market division, he did not claim that non-OPEC oil producers, which account for nearly 60% non-OPEC of the world oil supply, could lift supply to make up for the Libyan disruption. That's no surprise. Non-OPEC oil production has already peaked and couldn't increase supply either tomorrow or next year. Now that's non-OPEC production, and I've talked of OPEC production in the past. There is trouble in the energy space. The Colorado Independent. Global unrest, energy uncertainty fuel renewed interest in Colorado's oil shale production. With crude oil prices creeping back towards now over $100 a barrel and unrest racking the Middle East from Egypt, where 3 million barrels of mostly US-bound oil passes through the Suez Canal each day, to Bahrain, home of the US Navy's Fifth Fleet, it's not surprising there's renewed interest in Colorado's vast oil shale reserves. Very hopeful article by the Colorado Independent, if you want to read it. On a similar subject, we had in Yahoo Business News this morning, BHP Billiton makes $4.75 billion push into US shale gas. Shale oil, shale gas. And BHP Billiton going in there, it's a very dodgy thing to do. They're miners, so they might be better at getting at it than the actual oil producers, because it's more a mining operation than it is an oil extraction operation. But if you want to get the gen on what's happening and to get, put it this way, Our Finite World is the blog of Gail the Actuary. Now, if you've never heard of or never come across Gail the Actuary, then you probably don't know anything about oil and its peak oil and its relation to economics. Because to have researched it and got lots of information without bumping into Gail the Actuary, I think it'd be impossible. But anyway, moving on to what she says in an article that's linked obviously below on the website. We have known for a long time that huge amounts of oil are available in forms that are increasingly difficult to extract. The question, in my view, is how much of this huge amount of oil is economic to extract. This is closely related to energy return on energy invested. Energy return on energy invested. At some point, oil becomes too expensive to extract in either money form or energy form. It's just too expensive to get out. You don't make any profit on it, or you take more barrels of oil to get it out than barrels of oil that you do get out, or the equivalent of British thermal units of gas to get Canadian oil tar Syncrude out. It's all a balance. It's a profit and loss balance. And the balance, most important balance, is energy in compared to energy out. Because the world's only got a certain amount of energy waiting to be used. To me, she sums up, to me, the big question is whether the Bakken oil shale, other oil shales, and all the additional national NGLs can really be made economic. If they can, and the amount of oil extracted raised to the hoped for 2+ million barrels a day by 2015 and the 4.7+ million barrels a day by 2020, then the new oil supplies may help to keep recession away for a while longer. But if not, we are likely nearing the point where limited oil supply will push us more and more into recession. I am doubtful that the new oil shale sources can ramp up as quickly as hoped, but there is at least some glimmer of hope that these fuels will help to keep the day of reckoning away a bit longer. And that is Gail the actuary being optimistic, let's say. Without energy, money is effectively worthless. Bye.